handbag. Ancient Sumerians were more than familiar with handbags, or perhaps objects that modern people perceive as such.
The Sumerians carved it into stone over 5,000 years ago, and they were not the first. A rigid container with a curved handle, identical to a modern handbag, gripped by beings who are not supposed to exist. Winged, eagle-headed, fish-bodied, always holding the same object. And every ancient culture that depicted it made the same quiet decision afterward. They stopped showing what was inside. Not once, not anywhere. Across 12,000 years of carvings, across 3 continents, the bag stays closed because what was inside it was never meant to be seen. And the reason why is darker than you think. The object that should not exist. Mainstream archaeology has spent a century explaining this away. A bucket, a pouch, a ritual container. Nothing to look at here. Move along. But the pattern does not hold. The object appears in places that should share nothing with each other. It is carried by figures that multiple ancient cultures describe in almost identical terms. And the deeper you follow the trail, the more it starts to look like someone, at some point, decided the truth about this object was too dangerous to pass down. This is the mystery of the handbag of the gods, and what was inside it was never meant to be seen. In the ancient ruins of what was once the cradle of civilization, carved into stone tablets that have survived for thousands of years, there is an image archaeologists cannot fully explain. Towering figures dominate the scenes. Some have wings. Some have the features of eagles. Some have the bodies of fish. They wear elaborate headdresses. They perform what appear to be sacred rituals, and in their hands, gripped with unmistakable purpose, they carry something that looks shockingly familiar. It looks like a handbag, not a rough pouch, not a simple sack. A structured, rigid container with a curved handle, identical in proportion to something you might see on a modern city street. The same object appears again and again across Mesopotamian art, held by beings ancient texts describe as the teachers of humanity. The ones who gave us writing, mathematics, agriculture, law. For decades, mainstream archaeology has offered a clean explanation. It is a bucket. But the same object shows up across thousands of miles and thousands of years. In Turkey, at a site so old it predates the supposed invention of civilization by 7,000 years. In Mexico, carved by cultures with no known contact with the ancient Middle East. In Maori myths, in ancient Egyptian symbolism, in traditions scattered across the globe, the same object, the same shape, the same association with divine beings who brought knowledge to humanity. Either this is the most remarkable coincidence in the history of archaeology, or something else is going on. The teachers of humanity. The story begins in ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates in what is now modern Iraq. This is where human civilization is said to have begun. The first cities, the first writing, the foundation of human progress emerged from this region roughly 6,000 years ago. The Sumerians built the first of these civilizations. They left behind thousands of clay tablets in cuneiform script documenting their laws, their commerce, their literature, and their beliefs. Buried inside those beliefs is a class of beings almost nobody outside of Assyriology has ever heard of: the Apkallu. The Apkallu were not ordinary humans, they were sages, semi-divine figures who served as intermediaries between the gods and mankind. Ancient texts describe them as the ones who brought civilization to humanity after a great flood had destroyed the previous world. They taught humans how to build cities, how to cultivate crops, how to write and calculate. They were the founders of everything we call civilization. In Mesopotamian art, the Apkallu appear in several forms. Some are winged men in elaborate robes, others have the heads of eagles, and some are depicted as fishermen. That last form connects to one of the strangest figures in all of ancient mythology, Oannes. According to the Babylonian priest Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, but drawing on much older sources, Oannes emerged from the Persian Gulf in ancient times. He had the body of a fish, but beneath his fish head was another head, a human one. He had human feet emerging from his fishtail. During the day, he came onto land and taught humans writing, sciences, arts, agriculture, law, and city building. At night, he returned to the sea. Oannes and the Apkallu represent the same concept, divine beings who gave humanity the knowledge to build civilization. They appear throughout Mesopotamian art for thousands of years, and almost always they are carrying the handbag. Before you keep watching, before we go deeper, if this investigation is pulling you in, take a second to subscribe and hit the bell. It genuinely helps us keep digging into these forgotten corners of history. And drop a comment right now with your best guess about what was inside that bag, because what comes next is going to make your first guess feel a lot less certain. The problem with the bucket theory, they're carrying these things that people call handbags, but in reality, they're not handbags in this instance, they're buckets. The official explanation has a name, the bandudu, a ritual bucket used in purification ceremonies. The Apkallu are often depicted holding a cone-shaped object in their other hand, which archaeologists interpret as a ritual applicator used to sprinkle water or oil during sacred rites. The bucket held the liquid, the cone applied it, a tool for fertility or purification, nothing more. And on paper, it holds together. Ritual purification was central to Mesopotamian religion. The bucket and cone imagery does appear in contexts that suggest religious ceremony. If you want the simplest explanation, the bandudu is it, but three problems refuse to go away. First, the figures carrying these objects are not ordinary priests. They are the Apkallu, the beings credited with founding civilization itself. They are depicted alongside the Tree of Life, one of the most sacred symbols in Mesopotamian cosmology. They appear in the throne rooms of kings, in the most important religious spaces. Would the beings who gave humanity writing, mathematics, and law really be remembered for carrying water buckets? Would the symbol most connected to the founders of civilization be nothing more than a janitor's tool? Second, the object itself does not look like a bucket. Buckets in ancient art typically have wider mouths or visible contents. The Mesopotamian handbag has a rigid, structured appearance, a curved handle designed for carrying, not pouring. The proportions are wrong for a bucket, but perfect for a container meant to hold something precious, portable, something you would never want to spill. And third, most damaging of all, the same symbol appears in places where Mesopotamian ritual practices could not possibly have influenced the artwork. This is where the mystery stops being a quirk of Mesopotamian religion and becomes something much stranger. The site that rewrote the timeline. In southeastern Turkey, on a dry hilltop locals had ignored for centuries, archaeologists uncovered the most disruptive find of the last 100 years. Göbekli Tepe, massive stone pillars arranged in circles, decorated with elaborate carvings of animals, symbols, and human figures. A complex ceremonial site built with planning and purpose, and it is more than 12,000 years old. Read that again. 12,000 years. This date breaks everything. Göbekli Tepe predates the supposed invention of agriculture by at least 1,000 years. It predates pottery. It predates permanent settlements. It predates everything we thought was necessary for humans to build monumental architecture. According to the standard timeline, the people who built it should have been primitive hunter-gatherers, small bands, stone tools, barely surviving the end of the Ice Age. They should not have had the organization or technical knowledge to construct massive stone monuments decorated with sophisticated artwork. And yet there it is, impossible according to everything we thought we knew. And here is where it gets stranger. Among the carvings of Göbekli Tepe on those massive stone pillars is the handbag symbol. The same structured container, the same curved handle, the same proportions. This is not a bucket for Mesopotamian purification rituals. Göbekli Tepe was built at least 7,000 years before Sumerian civilization existed. Whatever this symbol meant to the people who carved it into those pillars, it had nothing to do with the bandudu, nothing to do with Mesopotamian religion at all. So, what was it? And why, 7,000 years later, Did the Sumerians carve the exact same object into the hands of their sacred teachers as if it had always been part of the story? The same symbol on the other side of the world. The mystery gets worse when you leave the Middle East entirely. In Mexico, at the ancient Olmec site of La Venta, there is a stone monument known as Stela 19, carved roughly 3,000 years ago. It depicts a figure scholars have nicknamed the Ambassador. He wears elaborate ceremonial dress and appears to be interacting with a feathered serpent, one of the most important symbols in all of Mesoamerican religion. And in his hand, he carries what appears to be the exact same handbag. The Olmec had no contact with ancient Mesopotamia, none. They developed on the opposite side of the world, separated by an ocean no one was supposed to cross until thousands of years later. Their writing system, their calendar, their religious beliefs, all developed independently from Middle Eastern civilization. And yet there it is, the same shape, the same rigid structure, the same curved handle. The Toltec civilization, which came later, depicted similar objects as well. Figures at the ancient city of Tula carry handbag-like containers in poses that echo the Mesopotamian apkallu almost perfectly. The conventional explanation would be coincidence, but that explanation collapses the moment you look at the specific context where the handbag appears. It is never associated with ordinary carrying. It is never shown being used for everyday tasks. It is always in the hands of divine beings, always linked to the origins of knowledge, always tied to the moment civilization itself began. In Maori tradition from New Zealand, there is a myth about 3 baskets of knowledge. The god Tain ascended to the highest heaven and obtained 3 key, or baskets, containing different types of wisdom, divine beings, baskets, knowledge that founded civilization. The parallels are almost impossible to ignore. In ancient Egypt, the Ankh symbol, representing life and divine power, has been compared by some researchers to the handbag shape. The gods are frequently depicted holding the Ankh by its loop in a pose almost identical to how the apkallu hold their handbags. What we are looking at, across multiple continents and multiple millennia, is a pattern. Divine beings associated with the origins of civilization and knowledge, carrying a distinctive container. Random coincidence should produce random variation. Different cultures should associate their knowledge bringers with different objects. Instead, we get the same basic symbol repeated across cultures that supposedly had no contact with each other. Either multiple civilizations independently invented the same specific symbol for the same specific concept, or there is a connection mainstream archaeology has refused to see. Which leads to the question researchers have been circling for decades. What was inside the bag? The 4 theories. The most conservative theory is that the handbag represented a seed bank. After the catastrophic end of the last ice age, survivors of the cataclysm would have needed to restart agriculture in a devastated landscape. A portable container holding preserved seeds and agricultural knowledge would have been priceless, the single most valuable possession a survivor could carry. This fits the timeline exactly. Göbekli Tepe was built right at the end of the Ice Age, during the period when agriculture was supposedly first emerging. The apkallu were credited with teaching humanity farming techniques. If the handbag held the seeds and knowledge needed to restart civilization after a global catastrophe, its sacred status makes perfect sense. But some researchers believe it held something more advanced than seeds. The second theory proposes the object was a portable power source. This comes from a question mainstream archaeology has never really answered. How did ancient peoples build what they built with the technology they supposedly had? The massive stones at Göbekli Tepe, the surgical precision of Mesopotamian architecture. It all points to capabilities we cannot account for. If the handbag contained a technology that could manipulate matter or energy in ways we do not understand, it would explain both the object's sacred status and its association with the beings who taught humanity to build. The knowledge bringers were not just carrying information, they were carrying the tools to make it real. The third theory is more speculative. The handbag contained a genetic toolkit. Ancient texts from multiple cultures describe the gods creating or modifying humanity, shaping humans for specific purposes. The Sumerian creation myths describe the gods fashioning humans from clay mixed with divine blood. Similar themes appear in traditions worldwide. What if those myths preserved a memory of actual genetic modification? What if the handbag held the technology used to upgrade human capabilities, to transform primitive hominids into beings capable of civilization? It would explain why the object was so precious, why it was tied to the origins of humanity. And then there are the theories almost nobody wants to sit with for too long. Some researchers propose the handbag was a consciousness device, a technology designed to expand human awareness. The pineal gland has been associated with spiritual experiences across many cultures, and ancient Mesopotamian art includes imagery some interpret as direct references to it. If the handbag contained a technology that could stimulate the pineal gland, it would explain the connection between these objects and divine knowledge. The knowledge bringers were not just teaching information, they were upgrading human consciousness itself. The final theory is the one almost no serious academic will touch on the record, that the handbag was a reality projector, a device that could influence the very structure of reality itself. This theory borrows from quantum physics and simulation theory, suggesting that what we perceive as physical reality might be far more malleable than we assume. Ancient myths from multiple cultures describe the gods creating the world through divine words, divine intent. What if those myths preserved a memory of a technology that could literally shape reality? What if the handbag was the device used to program the world we live in? These theories range from plausible to absurd. But one thing unites every single one. The handbag represents something more significant than a ritual bucket. Whatever was inside, it was important enough to be carved alongside the founders of civilization, important enough to appear in sacred contexts across multiple cultures, important enough to survive in human memory for more than 12,000 years. Why did the symbol disappear? If the handbag was so important, there is one question the official narrative has never answered. Why did it disappear? The symbol appears prominently at Göbekli Tepe. It appears throughout Mesopotamian civilization for thousands of years. It appears in Mesoamerican art. And then, gradually, it fades. Later civilizations do not depict the handbag with anywhere near the same frequency. The symbol that was once central to depictions of divine knowledge bringers becomes rare, then absent. Something obviously significant to ancient peoples was forgotten or suppressed. The simplest explanation is that the beings who carried the handbags left. If the Apkallu and their equivalents in other cultures were real, whether divine, extraterrestrial, or survivors of a lost civilization, they might have completed their mission and departed. The symbol lingered in cultural memory, then faded as the beings themselves became distant myths. But there is a darker explanation, one that says the knowledge was deliberately hidden. As organized religions developed and consolidated power, they may have suppressed traditions that credited civilization's origins to beings other than their own gods. The handbag symbol would have been dangerous to established religious authorities with every reason to claim exclusive access to divine truth. To let a rival origin story survive was to undermine their own. This connects to persistent ideas about secret knowledge preserved by hidden groups. The Vatican archives, Masonic traditions, mystery schools, repositories of occult knowledge that allegedly kept what the mainstream refused to remember. The pattern of knowledge suppression is well documented throughout history. Books burned, libraries torched, heresies erased. Some go further, suggesting the handbag's true nature was recovered in modern times and is being quietly kept out of the public record by military and intelligence agencies. But to understand the biggest picture, you have to step back much further. The lost civilization hypothesis. What if the beings depicted carrying the handbags were not aliens? Not gods in the supernatural sense, but survivors of a destroyed human civilization that existed before recorded history. This idea has gained real traction in the last 20 years. not because of internet theorists, but because of mounting evidence that the standard timeline of human civilization is incomplete. Göbekli Tepe proved that complex monument building existed thousands of years earlier than anyone thought possible. Underwater ruins off the coasts of India and Japan suggest advanced settlements once existed in areas now submerged under hundreds of feet of water. Climate science has confirmed the end of the Ice Age involved catastrophic events on a planetary scale: massive flooding, rapid temperature changes, environmental devastation. What if a civilization existed before those catastrophes? What if it achieved technological capabilities we do not fully understand? And what if, when their world was destroyed, survivors scattered across the globe, carrying the knowledge needed to rebuild? In this theory, the handbag becomes the relic of that forgotten mother civilization. It held whatever technology the survivors managed to preserve. They carried it to different regions. They taught local populations the arts of civilization. And they were remembered in every culture they touched as divine beings. Beings who emerged from the sea, descended from the sky, survived the Great Flood. This one theory would explain why the same symbol appears across cultures that supposedly had no contact. Why the beings carrying it are credited with founding civilization everywhere they appear. Why the symbol is tied to the aftermath of the Ice Age catastrophes. And why the knowledge eventually faded. The original survivors died. Their technology failed or was lost. Only the image remained, carved into stone, repeated by people who had forgotten what it actually was. The Apkallu, Oannes, Quetzalcoatl, Kukulkan, the merry basket carriers, the Egyptian gods with their ankhs. They might all be memories of the same group, the survivors of a pre-cataclysm civilization who seeded the restart of human culture. Mainstream archaeology does not accept this theory. Accepting it would mean acknowledging that human civilization is far older and far more cyclical than the standard model allows. That evidence of this earlier civilization has either been destroyed or is still hidden, and that the myths our ancestors told about divine knowledge bringers were more literal than metaphorical. But the anomalies keep piling up. Göbekli Tepe should not exist. It does. Ancient texts describe technologies that should not have been possible. The descriptions are specific, consistent, repeated across cultures. The handbag symbol appears across civilizations that should have developed independently. And there it is. At some point, the weight of anomalies becomes too heavy for the standard model to support. The warning we didn't listen to. And this brings us to the final, most unsettling piece of the mystery. If the handbag represented advanced technology from a previous civilization, and that civilization was destroyed by catastrophe, a disturbing question emerges. Was the technology in the handbag connected to the catastrophe itself? Ancient myths from multiple cultures describe the destruction of previous worlds through flood, through fire, through divine judgment. Scholars typically read these stories as primitive attempts to explain natural disasters. But what if they preserved memories of an actual technological civilization that destroyed itself? The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, supported by growing geological evidence, proposes that Earth was struck by fragments of a comet approximately 12,000 years ago. The impacts would have triggered massive fires, floods, and climate disruption on a planetary scale. The dating aligns almost perfectly with the end of the Ice Age, and with the period when Göbekli Tepe was built and then mysteriously, deliberately buried. But what if those impacts were not purely natural? What if a previous civilization's technology contributed to the disaster? What if the handbag holds knowledge capable of destroying worlds as easily as building them? This casts the entire mystery in a different light. The beings who carried the handbag were not just bringing gifts. They were carrying warnings. The technology that helped restart civilization may have been the same technology that destroyed the one before. The handbag was both a blessing and a curse, a tool and a tombstone. The disappearance of the handbag symbol might not have been forgetting. It might not have been suppression. It might have been deliberate concealment, hiding dangerous knowledge until humanity was ready to handle it, if we ever would be. This connects to themes that repeat in mythologies across the planet: forbidden knowledge, divine fire stolen from the gods, fruit from trees that should not have been eaten, stories told as warnings. Warnings about technology that seems beneficial but carries existential risk. And here we are, 12,000 years later, building technologies that could benefit humanity immensely or end us entirely. Artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, nuclear weapons, climate manipulation, capabilities previous generations could not have imagined, with consequences we cannot fully predict. The handbag of the gods might be more relevant right now than at any point since it was first carved into the stone at Göbekli Tepe. What was inside it? We may never know for certain. The objects themselves, if they ever existed as physical artifacts, have been lost for millennia. All we have left are the images, the myths, the stubborn, persistent memory of beings who carried something precious, something powerful, something that helped build the world we live in. But the question is not academic. If the handbag represented technology from a previous civilization that destroyed itself, we are repeating patterns that have ended badly before. If it held knowledge that can build worlds or end them, we need to understand what we are dealing with before we rebuild it. The symbol appears at Göbekli Tepe, built 12,000 years ago and then deliberately buried. It appears in Mesopotamia in the hands of beings who emerged after a great flood to restart civilization. It appears in Mexico, carried by figures connected to feathered serpents and divine knowledge. Always the same shape, always held by beings who changed everything. The mainstream explanation says it was a bucket for ritual water, but the pattern says it was something more. Something that helped build our world, and possibly something that destroyed the world before. The mystery is not solved. The symbol is not explained. The questions it raises about human origins, lost civilizations, and dangerous knowledge remain wide open. What was inside the handbag of the gods? After 12,000 years, we are still trying to figure it out, and given what the answer might mean for our future, we may not have as much time as we think. So tell me, after everything you just heard, what do you think was inside that bag? A seed vault that let humanity start over? A weapon that ended the world before us? A piece of technology we lost and are about to rediscover? Or a warning we were never meant to decode? Drop your theory in the comments, because the strangest part of this story might be the simplest one. The answer is already staring at us from the stone. We just forgot how to read it.